Jamal walked slowly through the tall gates of the new school, his bag pressed firmly against his shoulder. It was early morning, the sun shining softly on the long rows of polished windows. The building was huge, much bigger than the one he had left behind in his old neighborhood. Everything looked neat, clean, and almost too perfect. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nervous heart. It was not easy to be the new student, and it was even harder when you looked different from almost everyone around you. Inside the hallway, students gathered in groups, laughing, talking, and sharing jokes only they seemed to understand. Jamal walked carefully, his eyes searching for the classroom number written on a small paper in his hand. He felt their stares, curious eyes scanning the new boy who didn't yet belong. He lowered his gaze and kept moving, reminding himself of the words his father had spoken the night before. "Keep your head up, son. You're strong. You belong anywhere you step." Jamal wanted to believe those words, but right now, the air felt heavy. He finally found his classroom and pushed the door gently. The teacher, a woman with glasses and a soft voice, welcomed him. "Class, this is Jamal. He'll be joining us from today." For a brief moment, silence fell. Then whispers floated across the room. Jamal gave a small nod, trying to smile, but it faded when he noticed a few students in the back laughing under their breath. The teacher pointed toward an empty desk near the middle row. Jamal started walking toward it, his shoes clicking lightly against the floor. But before he could sit, 3 boys stretched out their legs, blocking his way. They leaned back in their chairs, smirking with an air of ownership. One of them pushed Jamal's books to the side, his hand deliberately brushing the desk as if to claim it. "Sorry, this seat's taken," the boy muttered with a grin, his friends chuckling. Jamal froze, gripping the strap of his bag. The rest of the class looked on, some with pity, others with amusement. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. He thought of his father again, who always said that real strength was not in fists but in patience. "It's my assigned desk," Jamal said quietly, his voice steady but soft. The boys only laughed louder. "Not anymore. You can sit somewhere else." They didn't move their legs, didn't shift an inch. The teacher, busy writing something on the board, didn't seem to notice what was happening behind her. Jamal glanced around, hoping for support, but the other students quickly looked away. No one wanted to get involved. With his heart heavy, Jamal turned to the back corner and found another chair. It wasn't really a desk, more like a spare seat shoved near the supply shelf. He placed his bag down and opened his notebook, ignoring the sting in his eyes. He reminded himself to stay strong, to act like it didn't matter, though deep down it did. He had worked so hard to get here, to make his father proud. Yet on his very first day, he was being told he didn't belong. As the lesson went on, Jamal tried to focus. The teacher's words flowed across the room, but his mind kept replaying the laughter of those boys. He wondered why people judged before they even knew you. He wasn't trying to take anything from them, only a place to sit. Still, they treated him as if he had no right to be there. At lunchtime, Jamal sat alone in the cafeteria, a sandwich in his hands. He watched groups of friends fill the tables, laughing and sharing food. He pretended not to care, pulling out a small notebook from his bag. He began to write, letting his thoughts spill out in quiet words. Writing had always been his escape, a way to keep his feelings safe when the world outside didn't understand. He wrote about the classroom, the blocked desk, the way the boys laughed. He wrote about his father's advice, and how he was trying so hard to live up to it. Jamal's father, Marcus, had always been a man of discipline and mystery. He carried himself with a quiet strength, his words sharp but wise. To Jamal, he was simply Dad, a father who worked late, who was protective, who gave everything for his only son. What Jamal didn't fully know was that Marcus's past carried shadows that most people would fear. Marcus had lived a life of power and danger, but he had left it all behind to raise his son in peace. He never wanted Jamal to feel the weight of that world. He only wanted him to have opportunities, education, and the chance to live without fear. As Jamal wrote, he felt calmer. Maybe tomorrow would be better. Maybe the bullies would forget. He closed his notebook and returned to class, determined to keep his head high. But as soon as he entered, the same boys looked at him with sly grins. One of them whispered loudly enough for the class to hear, "Guess he likes sitting with the trash in the back." Laughter erupted again, and Jamal clenched his jaw. He forced himself not to react. The day dragged on, and when the final bell rang, Jamal walked out quickly, his steps heavy but his face still calm. Outside the school gates, Marcus's black car waited. The sight of his father gave him a sense of relief. As he slid into the seat, Marcus glanced at him with sharp eyes. "How was the first day?" he asked. Jamal forced a smile. "It was fine, Dad. Just normal." But Marcus didn't miss the flicker of sadness in his son's eyes. He had lived long enough to know when someone was hiding pain. He reached over and placed a firm hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Remember, son. No one decides where you belong. You decide that. Don't let anyone make you feel small." Jamal nodded, holding his father's words close to his heart. That night, Jamal sat at his desk at home, the same notebook open. He wrote again, this time longer, his words filled with the quiet pain of the day. He didn't tell his father the truth, not yet. He didn't want to burden him. But his words carried everything: the blocked desk, the laughter, the lonely lunch, the burning question of why people could be so unkind. He didn't know it yet, but these small pages would soon open a door that would change everything. For now, Jamal closed the notebook and set it aside. He looked out the window at the night sky, stars spread across the darkness. He whispered softly to himself, "Tomorrow will be different." Deep down, he hoped it would. But fate had other plans. The next morning, Jamal walked into the school building with his shoulders straight, though his heart carried the weight of yesterday. He reminded himself that every new place took time, that maybe people just needed a chance to know him. His father's words still echoed in his mind: "No one decides where you belong." Those words gave him a little strength as he stepped into the hallway filled with laughter and chatter. But the moment Jamal entered his classroom, he knew the bullies had not forgotten him. They were waiting. One of them leaned back in his chair with a smirk, tapping Jamal's desk with his pencil like a drummer keeping time. Another whispered something to his friends, and soon soft laughter rippled across the row. Jamal ignored it and moved toward the seat in the corner again. His bag felt heavier, though nothing inside had changed. The teacher began her lesson, and Jamal opened his notebook, writing quickly to distract himself. But every few minutes, a paper ball landed on his desk or rolled to his feet. At first, he brushed it off, but then he noticed words scribbled on them: mocking notes, cruel jokes about his skin, about him being new, about not belonging. His stomach tightened, but he kept his face still, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. During break, Jamal walked to his locker. As he turned the dial, he realized it wouldn't open. Confused, he tried again, then noticed a sticky substance covering the lock. Someone had jammed gum into it. Behind him, he heard chuckles. When he turned, he saw the bullies leaning against the wall, pretending to talk but clearly watching him struggle. Jamal didn't say a word. He picked up his books for the next class and walked away, leaving the locker stuck. At lunch, things grew worse. Jamal carried his tray carefully, searching for a quiet spot where he wouldn't disturb anyone. He spotted an empty table near the corner and began walking toward it. But just as he sat down, one of the bullies brushed past him, accidentally bumping into his tray. The sandwich, juice, and fruit spilled across the floor. The cafeteria erupted with laughter. Jamal bent down, quietly gathering what he could, though most of it was ruined. He heard whispers, some mocking, others pitying. His hands trembled slightly, but he refused to let them see tears. He carried the ruined tray back to the counter and asked for a napkin. The lunch lady gave him one with kind eyes, but she didn't say anything. Jamal walked out of the cafeteria without eating, his stomach empty but his pride still intact. He found a bench outside under a tree and opened his notebook again. Writing gave him a sense of control. Each word he wrote was like a shield, protecting him from the cruelty around him. He scribbled down everything: the gum in the locker, the spilled lunch, the mocking laughs. He didn't know why he felt the need to record it all, but something inside him told him to keep a record. That evening, when Marcus asked how his day was, Jamal gave the same answer as before. "It was fine, Dad." Marcus studied him for a long moment. The man had lived through a life filled with lies, secrets, and hidden truths. He knew when someone was pretending. But he didn't press. Instead, he simply said, "Remember, Jamal, silence is strength, but silence also has its limits. Don't carry too much inside. Share when it's heavy." Jamal nodded, though he wasn't ready to tell the truth yet. As the days passed, the bullying continued. Jamal's seat in the corner became permanent. He wasn't allowed near his assigned desk. His locker remained jammed until the school custodian finally forced it open, but by then some of his notebooks had gone missing. He never got them back. In class, whenever he raised his hand to answer, whispers followed, mocking him even when his answers were correct. It was like a game to the bullies. Every effort he made became a chance to laugh. Yet, Jamal stayed calm. He never fought back, never raised his voice. Instead, he poured himself into his studies. He answered questions with quiet confidence, and he wrote more than ever in his notebook. Though he felt alone, he reminded himself that he had a father who believed in him. That thought carried him through each long day. But one afternoon, something happened that pushed him closer to the edge. After gym class, Jamal returned to the locker room to find his shoes missing. He searched every corner, but they were gone. He finally spotted them in the trash bin, covered in dirt. His chest tightened, but he picked them up, cleaned them as best as he could, and put them on without a word. The bullies laughed as they watched him walk out, but Jamal kept his face calm, even though his heart burned. That night, he sat at his desk longer than usual, writing page after page. His words were heavier now, filled with frustration and silent pain. He wrote about the shoes, the laughter, the unfairness of it all. He wondered why people chose to hurt others just for being different. He wondered how long he could stay silent before something inside him broke. Marcus passed by Jamal's room and paused at the door. He saw his son bent over his notebook, his shoulders tense, his pen moving quickly. For a moment, Marcus's mind traveled back to his own youth, to days when he had faced cruelty and disrespect. He had chosen a life of power back then, a life that gave him control but took away his peace. He had walked away from that world for his son, but now he felt the shadows stirring again. He didn't want Jamal to carry pain alone. The next morning, Jamal tried to start fresh. He told himself today would be different. He walked into class, sat quietly in his corner, and kept his focus on the lesson. But the bullies weren't finished. During group work, when the teacher stepped out for a moment, they circled his desk. One leaned down, whispering, "You'll never fit here. Why don't you just leave?" The others laughed, and one shoved his notebook onto the floor. Jamal picked it up slowly, his hands steady. He looked at them, his eyes calm but sharp, and said quietly, "You don't know who you're messing with." For the first time, his voice carried a warning. The bullies froze for a second, surprised by the sudden strength in his tone. Then they burst out laughing, brushing it off. "Oh really? Who's going to stop us?" "You, one sneered. Jamal didn't answer. He simply gathered his books and returned to his seat. But inside, something shifted. He was tired of being silent, tired of pretending it didn't matter. That night, when Marcus asked again about his day, Jamal wanted to tell him everything. The words sat on his tongue, heavy and ready to fall, but he stopped himself. He didn't want his father to worry. Instead, Jamal opened his notebook later that night and wrote down his most honest thought yet: if they knew who my father really was, they would never dare treat me this way. He didn't know that those very words, scribbled in quiet frustration, would soon open a door he could never close. The game the bullies thought was theirs to play was about to change, and none of them were prepared for what was coming. The morning began like any other, but Jamal felt a strange heaviness as he walked into school. His steps were slower, his eyes sharp, scanning every corner of the hallway. By now, he knew the rhythm of the bullies, the way they appeared when he least expected it, the smirks, the laughter that followed him like a shadow. He had grown used to the whispers, the stares, the cruel games, but something inside him was shifting. He no longer wanted to be just the quiet boy in the corner. As Jamal entered the cafeteria at lunchtime, the smell of food filled the air, and the noise of hundreds of voices echoed all around. He carried his tray carefully, his stomach empty and growling. He only wanted to eat in peace, maybe at his usual spot by the window. But the moment he stepped forward, one of the bullies stuck his foot out. Jamal didn't see it until it was too late. His tray tilted, food flying everywhere, splattering across the floor. Gasps filled the cafeteria, followed by laughter that rang in his ears. Jamal hit the ground hard, his sandwich crushed beneath him. For a few seconds, he stayed still, his palms pressed against the cold floor. The sound of laughter was sharp, cutting into him like knives. His face flushed, but he slowly pushed himself up. His eyes burned, but no tears fell. The bullies stood over him, grinning proudly as if they had won a prize. One leaned close, his voice dripping with mockery. "Careful, new kid. Don't want to trip again." The others burst into louder laughter. Around the cafeteria, students whispered, some shaking their heads, others smirking. Jamal stood tall, brushing off his clothes. His chest rose and fell quickly, his heart racing. He looked the bullies straight in the eye, and for the first time, his calm voice carried fire. "You don't know who you're messing with." The cafeteria fell silent for a brief moment, surprised by the sudden strength in his tone. Then the bullies broke into louder laughter, mocking him even more. "Oh really? And who are you?" "Superman." "Prove it," one sneered. Jamal didn't answer. He picked up his tray, set it on the counter, and walked out without another word. The silence he left behind was heavier than any shout. But inside, something had broken open. He was no longer just writing about the pain, he had spoken it out loud. And though they laughed, his words had planted a seed of curiosity. Students began whispering about what he meant. Was it just empty talk, or was there truth behind it? That night, Jamal sat in his room, his notebook open. His pen moved quickly, faster than ever before. He wrote about the cafeteria, the fall, the laughter, and the warning he had given. His hands trembled slightly, but not with fear this time, with anger. He wanted to believe he had done the right thing, but doubt crept in. Had he only made things worse? Would tomorrow bring more humiliation? Marcus knocked softly on the door and stepped inside. His sharp eyes studied Jamal's tense shoulders, the way his pen pressed hard against the paper. "Long day?" he asked calmly. Jamal closed the notebook quickly, forcing a smile. "Just school stuff, Dad. Nothing serious." But Marcus knew better. He had spent years reading people, understanding lies without words. He sat on the edge of Jamal's bed, his voice low and firm. "Son, you don't have to fight every battle with silence. Sometimes silence is wisdom. Other times, silence is surrender. You must learn the difference. Jamal wanted to tell him everything right then: the bullying, the laughter, the way they blocked his desk, the spilled lunches, the ruined shoes. The words sat on his tongue, but fear held them back. What if his father got angry? What if he came to school and made things worse? He simply nodded and whispered, "I understand." But Marcus did not look convinced. He reached out, placing a steady hand on Jamal's shoulder. "You carry more than you should. Don't forget, Jamal, you're my son. And that means you're never alone." Then he stood and left, his step slow and thoughtful. Later that night, Marcus passed by Jamal's desk and noticed the notebook left open. He hesitated, then picked it up. His eyes scanned the pages, line after line filled with pain, humiliation, and loneliness. Each word was like a punch to his chest. He read about the blocked desk, the gum in the locker, the ruined shoes, and finally, the cafeteria incident. And then he saw the last line Jamal had written in bold letters: "If they knew who my father was, they would never dare." Marcus's jaw tightened, and his eyes darkened. For years, he had left behind the shadows of his past, building a quiet life for his son. But now, those shadows stirred again. He placed the notebook back carefully, his mind racing. No one would break his son's spirit. Not while he was still breathing. The next morning, Jamal noticed something different. As he walked through the school gates, he saw a black car parked a short distance away. Inside, he glimpsed two men in suits, their eyes scanning the area with quiet intensity. They weren't there for anyone else he knew, somehow, they were connected to his father. Jamal felt a strange mix of relief and fear. In class, the bullies didn't wait long. They mocked him again, whispering jokes about his warning in the cafeteria. Still waiting for that big reveal, one snickered. "Who's your dad, the mayor?" Another laughed, slapping his friend's arm. The classroom filled with chuckles. Jamal stayed silent, but this time, he didn't look down. He kept his eyes steady, his back straight. Something inside him had shifted. He wasn't powerless anymore. He didn't know exactly what his father was planning, but he could feel the air changing around him. During lunch, whispers spread faster. Some students repeated Jamal's words, "You don't know who you're messing with." Others speculated, creating wild stories. By the end of the day, half the school was curious, and the other half was cautious. Even the bullies, though louder than ever, carried a flicker of unease in their eyes. That evening, when Jamal came home, Marcus was waiting at the table. His face was calm, but his eyes carried a storm. "Son," he said slowly, "I've read your words. All of them." Jamal froze, his heart pounding. He hadn't wanted his father to know. He stared down at the floor, waiting for anger or disappointment. But Marcus didn't shout. He leaned forward, his voice deep and steady. "You tried to carry this alone. You thought silence was strength. But strength also means knowing when to speak. I left behind a world I never wanted you to see, Jamal. But if that world comes for you, if they push you to the edge, then I will remind them who I am." Jamal lifted his eyes slowly, confusion and fear mixing inside him. He had always known his father was different, but now, for the first time, he realized just how deep that difference might go. He whispered, almost afraid to ask, "Dad, who are you really?" Marcus held his gaze, silent for a long moment, before answering in a voice so calm it made the room feel heavy. "I am your father. And that's all you need to know, for now." But Jamal sensed the truth in those words, that his father was more than he appeared. And soon, the bullies who laughed so freely would learn that lesson in ways they could never imagine. The next morning, Jamal woke up to a strange feeling in his chest. It was not fear, exactly, but something heavier, an awareness that things were about to change. The sun shone through his window, painting the walls with warm light, but it could not chase away the tension he felt. He got dressed slowly, each movement deliberate, as if preparing himself for what was coming. Downstairs, Marcus was already awake, sipping his coffee in silence. His eyes met Jamal's, and without a word, he nodded. It was a small gesture, but it carried the weight of trust and protection. Jamal understood. Today, he would not face the world alone. As they drove to school, the street seemed unusually quiet. Jamal noticed the black car following them from a distance, keeping pace without drawing attention. He did not speak, but his fingers clenched lightly around the seat belt. He could feel the presence of his father's men even without looking at them directly. Their eyes, sharp and watchful, seemed to guard him like invisible walls. When they arrived at school, Jamal took a deep breath. The doors loomed ahead, each step echoing in his ears. Inside, students moved in their usual chaos, but Jamal noticed subtle changes. Whispers followed him wherever he went, glances lingered a little longer, and some of the more cautious kids stepped aside. Rumors traveled faster than sound in this school, and the events of yesterday had reached every corner. In his first class, the bullies were waiting. They had spread themselves out, leaning against desks, whispering, and smirking. Their confidence had returned, but it was tempered with a hint of uncertainty. Jamal's eyes scanned the room, meeting theirs calmly. He said nothing, but the silence was heavier than any shout. One of the bullies, the leader, stepped forward. "So, what now, new kid? Are you going to cry again?" His voice was loud, trying to mask the flicker of unease in his eyes. The other bullies snickered, reinforcing the attempt to intimidate. Jamal didn't respond. Instead, he walked straight to his desk, the one they had tried to block before. He sat down as if he belonged there, his posture perfect, his gaze unwavering. A hush fell over the classroom. The teacher, who had been unaware of the earlier incidents, finally looked up, confused by the tension. "Is everything okay here?" she asked softly. The bullies froze for a moment, uncertain how to answer. Their bravado was strong, but Jamal's calm presence made it waver. Finally, the leader shrugged, muttering something about nothing, and sat back reluctantly. The tension in the room did not completely disappear, but the power dynamic had shifted. For the first time, Jamal felt that he had a measure of control. Lunch arrived quickly, and with it, another test. Jamal carried his tray carefully, scanning the cafeteria. To his surprise, the usual crowd of bullies was absent from his path. Students whispered as he walked, some pointing subtly, others stepping aside. The black car Marcus had sent remained parked nearby, and Jamal felt a strange sense of security. He chose a table near the center, deliberately. It was open, visible, and unclaimed. As he sat, the whispers grew louder. "Did you hear about him?" someone asked. "I think his dad, you know," another voice replied. "Yeah, people say he's not just rich, he's powerful." Jamal didn't react. He ate calmly, keeping his eyes forward, ignoring the curiosity and speculation. By the end of lunch, even the bullies had been forced to notice. They approached, trying once again to assert their control. "Hey, new kid," the leader said, a nervous edge creeping into his voice, "you're still talking big. Think you're scary or something?" Jamal looked up, his calm eyes meeting the leader's gaze. "I never wanted to be scary," he said slowly. "I just wanted respect. And respect doesn't come from fear. It comes from knowing your limits and knowing mine." His voice was quiet but firm, and the room seemed to absorb it. The bullies hesitated. No one had ever spoken to them like this before. The leader opened his mouth, trying to think of a comeback, but the words caught in his throat. Something about Jamal's presence, the quiet authority in his voice, and the unspoken power that followed him, made even the boldest bully second-guess his actions. Later that day, Jamal was called to the principal's office. His heart beat quickly, but he did not run. He walked with steady steps, knowing that his father's influence and careful planning had already set the stage. The principal, a kind but firm woman, looked up with concern. "Jamal, I heard about the cafeteria incident. Are you okay?" Jamal nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I'm fine." He spoke respectfully, but his confidence was clear. The principal noticed it too. She leaned back in her chair, studying him. "You've handled this better than I expected," she said. "But I want to make sure you're safe. We can't have bullying continue." Jamal smiled faintly. "I understand, ma'am. I just want to learn and be treated fairly. That's all." The principal nodded, and Jamal left, feeling lighter. He realized that his courage, combined with his father's careful presence nearby, had shifted more than just the bully's attitudes, it had shifted how the entire school viewed him. After school, Marcus met him outside. "How did it go?" he asked, his calm eyes scanning the streets for any sign of trouble. Jamal smiled, a real, wide smile for the first time in weeks. "It went better than I expected. They're still talking, still laughing, but they're scared too." Marcus nodded, pleased but thoughtful. "Good. But remember, fear alone is never enough. Strength isn't just about making people afraid. It's about knowing when to stand and when to step back." Jamal listened, absorbing every word. That evening, Jamal sat at his desk, writing in his notebook once more. But this time, his words were different. They were filled not with despair or frustration, but with understanding and strategy. He wrote about respect, about boundaries, about how courage could change people not just by action, but by presence. He wrote about his father, not in fear, but in admiration. Marcus had shown him a world he could not yet fully see, a world where power was quiet but absolute, and where it could be used wisely. The next morning, school felt different. The bullies still tried to assert themselves, but their confidence had weakened. They whispered among themselves, glancing at Jamal with uncertainty. And even when they tried to be loud and intimidating, their words carried less weight. Jamal had become more than just a student. They could sense he was someone who commanded respect without needing to shout or fight. By the end of the week, a strange thing happened. One of the bullies, the quiet one who had never been the leader, approached Jamal after class. His hands were shaking slightly, and his eyes avoided direct contact. "Hey. I just wanted to say. I'm sorry," he muttered. Jamal looked at him, surprised, but nodded. "Thank you," he said simply. "I appreciate that." It was a small moment, but it meant more than any victory. It showed Jamal that change was possible, that courage and patience could win over even the hardest hearts. And he knew that his father's guidance had played a role too, not through fear, but through the quiet strength and protection that Jamal could feel without anyone else knowing. That night, Marcus watched Jamal from the doorway. His son was smiling, relaxed for the first time in weeks, writing not in anger, but in clarity. Marcus knew the lessons were taking hold. Jamal had begun to understand what it meant to stand tall, to claim respect without seeking revenge, to be powerful without needing to use force. "Good work today," Marcus said quietly, stepping closer. Jamal looked up, his eyes bright. "Thanks, Dad," he replied. I think I understand now." Marcus nodded. "Understanding is the first step. The next step is knowing how to use that understanding wisely. And I believe you're ready." Jamal smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest. He knew challenges would continue. He was still new, and there were still bullies who had not learned their lessons. But he also knew that he was no longer alone, and that his strength, combined with his father's quiet guidance, could change the world around him, One step at a time. The next week at school felt different, almost like a new world had opened for Jamal. The whispers and glances that had followed him every step of the way were still there, but they carried a different tone. No longer were they filled with mockery or fear, they were mixed with curiosity, respect, and even a hint of admiration. Jamal walked the hallways with his usual calm, each step deliberate, but now he felt lighter. He was no longer just the new kid, he was someone who had quietly earned a place in this school. The bullies, those who had tormented him since the first day, were noticeably changed. Their once bold smirks had softened, replaced with cautious expressions. They still tried to push boundaries, but each attempt was met with Jamal's calm presence. He never raised his voice, never shouted, and never retaliated with anger. Instead, he listened, he observed, and when necessary, he responded with quiet confidence. The contrast between their chaos and his composure was striking, and students began to notice it. One afternoon, during history class, the leader of the bullies approached Jamal again. His movements were hesitant, and his usual confidence was missing. "Hey, Jamal," he began, his voice uneven, "I just wanted to. I don't know. I guess I wanted to say thanks." Jamal looked up from his notebook, curious but calm. "Thanks for what?" he asked gently, not a hint of sarcasm in his voice. The bully swallowed hard. For not flipping out yesterday. For, I don't know, showing us that there's more to this than just fighting." His words were awkward, but sincere. Jamal smiled slightly. "You're welcome," he said simply. "It's never too late to start making better choices." This small exchange set off a ripple effect. The other bullies began to reconsider their behavior. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they started to approach Jamal differently. They still teased occasionally, but it was lighter, almost playful, and never mean-spirited. Jamal noticed these changes and responded in kind, keeping interactions fair and balanced. Over time, the tension that had defined the first few weeks began to fade. Outside of school, Jamal's life was also changing. His father, Marcus, continued to guide him with quiet wisdom. After school, they would walk together through the streets of their neighborhood, discussing lessons about respect, courage, and patience. Marcus never pushed Jamal to be aggressive, instead, he taught him the value of intelligence, observation, and understanding human behavior. "Power is not just about making people afraid," Marcus often said. "It's about knowing how to act wisely, so that others follow not because they must, but because they want to." Jamal absorbed these lessons eagerly. He began to see the world differently, not as a place of constant struggle, but as a place where knowledge, courage, and patience could open doors. He understood now that being powerful did not mean intimidating others, it meant being strong in character, standing up for oneself, and knowing when to act and when to wait. One day, during a group project in science class, Jamal was paired with the leader of the bullies and a few other students. At first, he felt a flicker of anxiety. Working closely with them meant confronting past tensions. But as the project progressed, Jamal noticed a remarkable change. The students who had once ignored him or mocked him now listened carefully to his ideas, asked for his input, and respected his suggestions. The atmosphere was collaborative, positive, and even enjoyable. Jamal's classmates began to admire his calm confidence. They saw that he could remain unshaken under pressure, that he treated everyone with fairness, and that he didn't seek revenge even when he had been wronged. Slowly, Jamal began to form genuine friendships. For the first time in weeks, he felt a sense of belonging that went beyond fear or respect. It was based on trust and understanding. At home, Marcus watched these changes with quiet pride. He knew that Jamal's transformation was more than just about dealing with bullies, it was about growing into a strong, thoughtful young man. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Marcus spoke softly. "You've come a long way, Jamal. Do you see what I mean about strength and patience? Jamal nodded. Yes, Dad. I see it now. I understand that being strong isn't about scaring people. It's about knowing yourself, standing your ground, and helping others see the right path. Marcus smiled, pleased with his son's insight. Exactly. And remember, the people who respect you for that are the ones worth keeping close. The days turned into weeks, and Jamal's life at school continued to improve. The bullies no longer posed a threat, not because they had been frightened, but because they had learned a valuable lesson in respect. Other students began to approach Jamal for advice, for friendship, and for guidance on handling difficult situations. Jamal became a quiet leader in his own right, respected not for fear, but for character. One afternoon, while Jamal was walking home with a few friends, the former leader of the bullies spoke up. Hey, Jamal. I just wanted to say, thanks again. I don't think I ever told you how much your calmness helped me think about my own behavior. Jamal smiled, feeling a sense of closure. I'm glad, he said. It's never too late to change, and it's never wrong to try to be better. Back at home, Jamal reflected on everything that had happened. He thought about his first days at school, the fear and uncertainty, the bullying, and the moments of doubt. He remembered the tears, the frustration, and the feeling of being alone. But he also remembered the guidance of his father, the quiet protection of Marcus, and the lessons that had transformed him. He realized that those experiences, though difficult, had made him stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. That evening, as he prepared for bed, Jamal wrote in his notebook once more. But this time, his writing was filled with hope and vision. He wrote about the future he wanted to build, the person he wanted to become, and the ways he could help others navigate their own challenges. He understood that life would continue to bring obstacles, but he felt prepared to face them with courage, wisdom, and patience. The next day at school, Jamal noticed something remarkable. Students who had once avoided him now waved and smiled. Teachers treated him with respect, not because of his father's influence, but because of his own calm, confident behavior. Even the bullies, now friends in a fragile but growing trust, greeted him with genuine smiles. The hallways no longer carried tension but a quiet sense of harmony, a reflection of the change Jamal had inspired. By the end of the semester, Jamal had grown into a well-respected, admired student. He had learned the value of patience, the importance of character, and the strength that comes from understanding oneself and others. He had discovered that power was not something to wield for fear, but something to hold for responsibility and guidance. Marcus watched his son's growth with pride and quiet satisfaction. He knew that Jamal's journey was just beginning, but he also knew that the young man before him was prepared for anything life might throw his way. Jamal had faced fear, adversity, and the weight of misunderstanding, and he had emerged stronger, wiser, and kinder. In the quiet moments of reflection, Jamal thought about the lessons he had learned, that respect must be earned, that courage is quiet, and that true strength lies not in power over others, but in understanding and compassion. He knew he would carry these lessons with him forever, and that they would guide him through every challenge ahead. The story of the new student, once bullied and underestimated, had transformed not just his own life, but the lives of those around him. Jamal had shown that courage, patience, and integrity could change hearts, shift perspectives, and create lasting respect. And though his journey had begun with fear and uncertainty, it ended with hope, friendship, and the promise of a bright future. Jamal closed his notebook and looked out the window at the evening sky. The sun was setting, painting the world in warm colors, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. He knew challenges would always come, but he also knew that he had the strength to face them, the wisdom to navigate them, and the heart to inspire others along the way. And in that quiet moment, Jamal understood something profound: true power was not in dominance, fear, or control. True power was in respect, courage, understanding, and the ability to rise above adversity with dignity. And with that realization, he smiled, ready to face whatever the future had in store.